What are these learner-centered psychological principles? It was introduced to us by the American Psychological Association or APA in the year 1990. Learner-centered psychological principles provide a framework for developing and incorporating the components of new designs for schooling. These principles emphasize the active and reflective nature of learning and learners. Why is it important to better understand learner-centered psychological principles? Learner-centered education helps the student develop skills that will better equip them for their professional careers. Teachers can be trained in this approach so they can apply the principles and provide their students with a better learning experience. These are the principles categorized into four: cognitive and metacognitive factors, motivational and affective factors, developmental and social factors, individual difference factors. These principles are intended to deal holistically with learners in the context of real-world learning situations. Cognitive and metacognitive factors. Principle 1. Nature of the learning process. The learning of complex subject matter is most effective when it is an intentional process of constructing meaning from information and experience. The term intentional process at this point means that as a learner inside the classroom, the teachers or our teachers come to our room already have the objectives of the lessons, what will be the learning right after the class, and has already the strategies for those objectives to be met, and designed already an assessment task to know whether the students learn the lesson. This is why intentional process is present. Another term in here is constructing meaning, which means as future teachers, we go inside the classroom not just to feed learners with right information, but we help our learners use the knowledge that they acquire in the experience. Characteristics of successful learners are: first, active. A learner is active if he or she take part in teaching learning process like participating and collaborating with the teacher and other learners. Second, goal-oriented. Learners set goals for themselves. Third, self-regulating. Learners have the ability to monitor and assess their progress in the learning strategies. They also have the ability to focus on learning so they will not be distracted by environmental factors.
The goals of the learning process. The strategic nature of learning requires students to be goal-directed. Students must generate and pursue personally relevant goals. A student learning goals consistent with their personal and educational aspirations and interests. Personal learning goals are about improving students' learning, achievement, and building students' capacity to learn. They are about students becoming active participants in the learning process, empowering them to become independent learners and motivating them to achieve their full potential. The second factor is the construction of knowledge. The successful learner can link new information with existing knowledge in meaningful ways. It is an active process that happens through individual or social engagement. This implies that trainers should provide learners opportunities to socially and individually engage in the process of making meaning by using participatory. The construction of knowledge is an active process that happens through individual or social engagement. It is fostered by authentic and real-world environments, and at the same time We should capitalize on the learning that is happening outside of our training context, in the life of our participants, in their individual and social environment, in spontaneous or planned experiences, and on the richness of their cultural background.
The successful learner can create and use a repertoire of thinking and reasoning strategies to achieve complex learning goals. So, ang matagumpay na nag-aaral ay maaaring lumikha at gumamit ng isang repertoire ng pag-iisip at mga diskarte sa pangangatwiran upang makamit ang mga komplikadong layunin sa pag-aaral. So, successful learners use strategic thinking in their approach to learning, reasoning, problem solving, and concept learning. So, ang matagumpay na mga nag-aaral ay gumamit ng madiskarting pag-iisip sa kanilang diskarte sa pag-aaral, pangangatwiran, paglutas ng problema, at pag-aaral ng konsepto. They understand and can use a variety of strategies to help them reach learning and performance goals and to apply their knowledge in novel situations. So, nauunawaan nila at maaaring gumamit ng iba't ibang mga diskarte upang matulungan silang maabot ang mga layunin sa pag-aaral at pagganap at upang mailapat ang kanilang kaalaman sa mga sitwasyong nobela. The successful learner can create and use a repertoire of thinking and reasoning strategies to achieve complex learning goals. It assessed learners in developing, applying, and assessing their strategic learning skills. So, tulungan ang mga mag-aaral sa pagbuo, paglalapat, at pagtatasa ng kanilang mga kasanayan sa madiskarteng pag-aaral. So, number 5. Higher order strategies for selecting and monitoring mental operations facilitate creative and critical thinking. So, successful learners can reflect on how they think and learn, set reasonable learning or performance goals, select potentially appropriate learning strategies or methods, and monitor their progress toward these goals. In higher order strategies for selecting and monitoring mental operations, facilitate creative and critical thinking. It used instructional methods that focused on helping learners develop these higher order strategies to enhance learning and personal responsibility for learning. So, gumamit ng mga pamamaraan ng pagtuturo na nakatuon sa pagtulong sa mga nag-aaral na bumuo ng mas mataas na mga diskarte sa pagkakasunod-sunod upang mapahusay ang pagkatuto at personal na responsibilidad para sa pag-aaral. So, kung ang number 4, it assessed learners in developing, applying, and assessing their strategic learning skills. Sa number 5 is kuan siya is mag-use siya instructional methods nga nag-focus sa pagtabang sa mga learners sa pag-develop sa ilahang higher order strategies as well as to enhance learning and personal responsibility for learning.
Principle 6. Context of learning. Learning is influenced by environmental factors, including culture, technology, and instructional practices. These are affect culture, technology, instructional practices. As a student, you must sensitive with the culture of the student. So, make sure that whatever culture background they have, whatever belief they have, you must to really accept those who have sensitive culture because they are quality inside their classroom. Technology as well, we have maximize technology in order to us both learning. We use technology for searching in the present lesson, and so on. Instructional practices. Definitely, quality of teaching, quality of teachers really matters comes to learning. This factor influence the learning practice. That is sixth principle. Context of learning, environmental factor play vital role in the learning student. We have sensitive with the environment. Make sure it take advantage each technology in order for learning.
Number 7. Motivational and emotional influences on learning. What and how much is learned is influenced by the learner's motivation. Motivation to learn, in turn, is influenced by the individual's emotional states, beliefs, interests and goals, and habits of thinking. A student's belief about themselves as learners and the nature of learning have a marked influence on motivation. Positive emotions generally enhance motivation and facilitate learning and performance. Mid-anxiety can also enhance learning and performance by focusing the learner's attention on a particular task. It helps students avoid intense negative emotions. Examples given are anxiety, panic, rage, insecurity, and related thoughts like worrying about competence, ruminating about failure, fearing punishment, ridicule, or stigmatizing labels.
Next is intrinsic motivation to learn. Learning intrinsic motivation refers to an individual's process of learning which arises from natural curiosity and driven by personal interest. It gives way to the development of higher or more advanced learning. A person learns through by himself by the difficulties he's going through and not by depending on what he saw in his environment. For example, a boy found a dying bird but it doesn't have any wound. He will be curious in the reason why the animal is dying and will find way to know why. Apparently, he will do actions to know why it's dying. In that way, he's able to show his insightful thinking. In that way, he's able to show an intrinsically motivated learning. Intrinsic motivation also takes place when you do things for yourself, not to earn rewards, but because you find it enjoyable. Therefore, it's rooted in our own preference to learn, not because of other people drive us to do it. It simply happened because of our choices, which make us more intrinsically motivated and nurture us to be an advanced individual.
Effects of motivation on effort. Acquisition of complex knowledge and skills requires extended learner effort and guided practice. Without learners' motivation to learn, the willingness to exert this effort is unlikely without coercion. Effort is another major indicator of motivation to learn. The acquisition of complex knowledge and skills demands the investment of considerable learning energy and strategic effort, along with persistence over time. Educators need to be concerned with facilitating motivation by strategies that enhance learner effort and commitment to learning and to achieving high standards of comprehension and understanding. There are effective strategies with purposeful learning activities. These are guided by the practice that enhance positive emotions and intrinsic motivation to learn, and methods that increase learners' perceptions that a task is interesting and personally relevant.
Developmental and social factors. Principle 10. Developmental influence on learning. As individuals develop, there are different opportunities and constraints for learning. Learning is most effective when differential development within and across physical, intellectual, emotional, and social domains are taken into account. Individuals learn best when material is appropriate to their developmental level and is presented in an enjoyable and interesting way.
be aware of and understand developmental differences among students with and without emotional, physical, or intellectual disabilities to facilitate the creation of optimal learning contexts.
Learning is influenced by social interactions, interpersonal relations, and communication with others. Settings that allow for social interactions and that respect diversity, encourage flexibility thinking and social competence that enhance learning, allow for interactive and collaborative instructional contexts to provide individual an opportunity for perspective taking and reflective thinking that may lead to a higher levels of cognitive, social, and moral development, as well as the self-esteem. Social influence takes wide forms, including obedience, conformity, persuasion, social loafing, social facilitation, and peer pressure. There are three primary social influences, which are conformity, compliance, and obedience. In conformity, determines someone's wave or verbal greeting, not wishing to be made to be rude or unfriendly, is the example of conformity. The other one is compliance. When asking a friend or to ask a favor of a friend or to someone else's is one of example of good compliance, and the other one is the obedience. Example situation: consider a man who is visiting a fancy restaurant for the first time. He doesn't know the established etiquette for such an environment, but he's with a friend who's been in fancy restaurants many times before. To behave correctly or properly, the individual simply emulates the behavior of his friend, assuming it to be acceptable. A situation: if his friend would be polite to a customer or to anyone. Understanding to these social influence can be helpful to anyone looking to succeed.
Individual differences in learning. Learners have different strategies, approaches, and capabilities for learners that are a function of prior experience and heredity. Individuals are born with and develop their own capabilities and talents. Through learning and social acculturation, they have acquired their own preferences for how they like to learn and the pace at which they learn. It helps students examine their learner preferences and expand or modify them if necessary. Educators need to be sensitive to individual differences in general. They also need to attend to learner perception of the degree to which these differences are accepted and adapted to by varying instructional methods and materials.
Learning diversity. Learning is most effective when differences in learners' linguistic, cultural, and social backgrounds are taken into account. Language, ethnicity, race, beliefs, and socioeconomic status all influence learning. Paying careful attention these factors in the instructional setting enhances the possibilities for designing and implementing appropriate learning environments.
Standards and assessment, which is under the category of the individual differences and also the last principle of the learner-centered psychological principle. So why standards and assessment is in the last part? It is because after all the learning process, we conduct assessment through quiz, test, and etc. to assess if we really learn or if the learner gains progress, and also to measure or estimate the knowledge the learner have. Through setting high and challenging standards, the learner will do their best to learn and achieve the standard. Through assessment, the teacher will be able to know, determine, or gain insight into what students have understand, and if the standards are not met, the teacher will plan to provide guidance and give some helpful feedback for the students. There are different ways of evaluating the learner. Some of it are through diagnostic, formative, summative, and quiz, and etc. That would be all. Thank you.